So here's a diagram that I stole from the book, which is OK, because it's my book, so I can steal diagrams from it. We're going to spend today mostly up here at this top level, where we're looking at the client-server nature of web applications. The internet is this big magic cloud. Clients, like web browsers, are on one side of it, and servers that serve web content are on the other side. And then as we go through the course, we're going to make our way down through these other levels. But today, we're going to stay pretty much up there. So if we call that like the sort of 100,000-foot view, what does the web look like in that view? There's a bunch of clients, typically things like web browsers or maybe mobile apps. Those clients spend time talking to one or more servers. So we say that the web apps are client-server as opposed to, for example, what? What's a different kind of system that is network-oriented, but you wouldn't really describe as client-server? You can yell it out if you want. Peer-to-peer. What's the difference between client-server and peer-to-peer primarily? Anybody? Be brave. In a client-server system, the clients are usually optimized to do a particular kind of thing, which is that they're requesting information from the server. The server is optimized to serve many copies of the client. So it used to be the case that in the web, the clients tended to be a lot simpler than the servers. I don't think anybody would look at an iPhone today and say that it's simple, but I think it is still safe to say that clients and servers are optimized for very different kinds of tasks. In a peer-to-peer system, typically, everybody is both a client and a server, and that can make it trickier to hyper-optimize them for each individual thing. We also say that the web is request-reply oriented. So the way that web clients talk to servers is the client makes a request, the server sends a reply. What would be an alternative to request-reply oriented? Here's a hint: phone. Anybody? You all do speak, right? Come on, help me out here. What's an alternative to saying every interaction begins with a request and ends with a reply? It just happened. Did you hear that bing? Somebody's cell phone just went off. Somebody received a message of some kind. Probably the cell phone did not say, hey, do you have any messages for me? So a push architecture would be one example of a contrast to request-reply, in that not every interaction between the client and server has to begin with the client. But in the web, that's how it is. It's request-reply. The client begins every interaction. So the client and server, like I said, are each specialized for their tasks. They can be comparably complex. And as we'll see, client-server is an early example of a design pattern, which is a strategy that captures some common solution to a set of related problems. This particular design pattern is what we would call an architectural one, because it talks about, from a very high level, what are the sort of main types of entities that participate in the architecture, and what are the roles of those different entities. As we go through the course, we're also going to see computational patterns, formulas for solving kinds of problems, structural patterns, ways to arrange relationships among the classes in your application so that your code is more maintainable. So in general, this idea of this is a proven solution that over time we've extracted the commonality, and we're trying to capture the most common elements of solving some set of related problems. And just because we've been spending a lot of time in the weeds here, let's remember where we are. We started out with the web as a client-server system, and one level of detail below that, we've said, OK, here's the actual components within a service. We haven't talked about those yet, but we do know that we can query them and get things like JSON or XML back. We can also get back HTML and CSS, and we have not talked at all about those. So let's briefly talk about them. And I imagine that a number of you have probably sort of seen HTML through osmosis. So it's not going to look completely foreign to you. I am not going to walk you through HTML and CSS, but I'm going to treat you as mature software developers and give you the 20% of the concepts that will let you do 80% of the beginner tutorials really quickly, right? And that's the approach we're going to take for a lot of things in this class. You're going to have to teach yourself quite a bit, but we can save you some time if you start out, rather than just sort of blindly typing what the screencast tells you to type, understand the concepts first, and then as you're being asked, type this, type that, you have a sense of where in the conceptual framework it goes. Similarly, we are not going to make you a front-end design expert. Those people who put like the bouncy titles and the things that fly in and hijack your scroll bar, I have strong words for those people. But anyway, but you're not going to do that, right? However, because using myself as an audience, my goal is to avoid having the pages that you do create look like they were authored by vandals. Okay, you will not meet a person on this campus who has less graphic design sensibility than me. So my goal is to basically not screw up. And that's going to be my baseline for you guys. When you create an app, make it not look horrible. And fortunately, these days, it is way much easier to do that than it used to be. So, conceptual foundations, HTML, the hypertext markup language. It is a hierarchy of nested elements. As a computer scientist, these words are things you've probably heard before. The top level single element is the HTML document. Everything else nests within that. What kind of nested elements? Well, some of them describe text that could go on a page, like tables and paragraphs. Some of them describe things like images or forms that the user can fill in. And some of them are just structural. They say, this part of the page, I'm going to put a virtual container around it and manipulate it later, even if the virtual container does not itself cause any visual change in how the page is displayed. Each element in that hierarchy may have an ID, and it has 0 or more classes. The ID and the classes are used to connect it to styling information, which actually determines what the page will look like. So the most common sort of schema here is that there's one or more style sheets, which will associate attributes, especially classes and IDs, with visual elements that were tastefully chosen by people who understand graphic design, and you probably should just trust them. So as an example of how this looks, I will show you an example based on Bootstrap. I love Bootstrap. Bootstrap is not that hard to learn. It is open source, and it's designed as a set of styles that you can just use, and your site will not look horrible. And if that weren't enough, people have done like page templates based on Bootstrap. So let's sort of take a whirlwind tour of these 3 elements all together. Let me see if I have, where's the window that I want to show? If I turn mirroring back on, there it is. OK, there we go. OK, here is a page that this is downloaded and simplified a little bit from Bootstrap's website. It's an example of how you might put together a front page for selling some sort of a backup service, I guess. I've really done almost nothing to the example code off of their site. But you can see it's nicely laid out. There's sort of like this grid kind of thing going on, and there's some very like nicely elegant colored clean buttons and headlines and things. That's only because of the style sheet. If in the web developer extension, which I highly recommend that everybody has, if I click disable all styles, yeah, right? Here, let me get this thing out of the way. You go now. OK, so this is what the page looks like with just HTML. And this is what the page looks like with the magic of Bootstrap. This is, by the way, that's like the easiest it's ever been to do this. Because if we now look at the source code for this page, and don't be overwhelmed because there's a lot of stuff, the most important parts of this HTML file is this. This is the thing that says, download directly from Bootstrap's own website the Bootstrap style sheet. The Bootstrap style sheet has a bunch of declarations that say, if you attach certain classes to the elements of your HTML, we will make those elements look real nice in various ways. For example, if I scroll down just a bit, and we look at this section here with all those divs, you can kind of see the site side by side here, right? So you can get a sense that what's going on here is, well, here's the lists of different features in the different plans. These card body, card title things must have something to do with the thing that makes it look like a card. So card is not an HTML element. HTML elements are really, really basic low-level things like paragraphs and bulleted lists and buttons. But Bootstrap gives you kind of a higher level of abstraction and say, you can decide that something is a card, and a card has a title, a card has a body, and you do that by attaching the proper Bootstrap classes to these divs. What are the divs? Those are the elements in HTML that don't actually have any visual representation. They just say, this block of stuff goes together. It's like a structure, and you can nest them within each other. So if you do the Bootstrap tutorials, they will say things like, to create a card, you should create a div that says card. And within that div, you can create a nested one for the card's header. And then you create another nested one for the card's body. And then inside the body, if you do a list of the things you want on the card, we'll format them nicely and center them. So it took me probably an hour or two to learn enough Bootstrap to make a site that didn't make me ashamed of being a web programmer of some kind. And it'll probably take you about the same amount of time. So what's the, and again, remembering how humble this can be if we turn off styling entirely, right? If we turn off styling, we can see that, like HTML has no notion of a card. These things that are, the lists of bullets under each card, everything is just presented like in a straight line right now. Right? So the nice laying things out on a grid and making them appear next to each other. And by the way, not only that, but check this out. Let's re-enable styles. And what happens if I start shrinking my window to be smaller? Smaller, smaller, smaller. Ooh. 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 In fact, the Chrome web developer even has this feature where you can pretend you're on a mobile phone. And now you can sort of interact with the page as a mobile phone user might see it. You can even scroll. So anybody who's done front-end design, the property that I just illustrated is called what? Responsive. It means that if the page is viewed at a variety of sizes or resolutions, like from phone to big screen, something sane happens to the layout. In this case, the choice was, because there's no longer room to sort of display 3 cards side by side, the layout rules automatically cause the cards to line up vertically, which kind of makes sense for a phone. Now, does that mean that if you use Bootstrap and you sort of use the classes correctly, that your site will magically look just as good on a phone as on a huge screen? No. But if you don't use Bootstrap, it will certainly be much harder to get to the place that you want to get to. So Bootstrap not only gives you higher level elements like cards and headlines and things like that, nav bars, all kinds of great stuff, but in general, it also styles the elements so that on a variety of screen sizes, something sensible happens that keeps the site usable. There was a question.
For the industry, do the software engineers work on tools like CSS or Bootstrap, or do UI UX engineers work to make websites more beautiful?
So the question was, in industry, who works on the sort of CSS Bootstrap, the front-end design, the visual styling of the site? Here's the answer that I think is most honest. It is not uncommon to have people who specialize in just doing that. However, I think if you call yourself a software engineer, you ought to be able to do something basic. The other nice thing about using a framework like Bootstrap is it forces you to be clear about the logical divisions of your page. Like, this is a card, this is a nav bar. Those are things that you can't really express in HTML. So even if the company has a person who's just going to do the front end, being able to hand that person a preliminary design and they say, oh, I get it. You had the idea of using cards for this. They can go redesign what that looks like, but the intention was clear. So I think if you're this is why when people say in this class, well, on my team for the project, I'm going to be the front-end engineer. No, you're not. Everybody is going to be everything. If you're a software engineer, you really need to know something about every layer of the stack. It doesn't mean that you become an expert in every layer, and you may decide that one or the other is where you kind of want to spend 80% of your time in the future. But having the facility to understand what's going on at each layer and to do basic work at that layer, that's what makes a software engineer valuable, is that when there's no more front-end work left to do, that person can now contribute to a different part of the app. So yes, you could specialize in it, but I think as a software engineer, you should never specialize in something to the exclusion of everything else, because you always want to have a job. Plus, it's more fun. OK, so we got that. So that's the difference between very, very plain, unstyled HTML. The markup is on the left. There is, by the way, a great tutorial. We recommended it on the course homepage. It's in the syllabus. If you've not done HTML or CSS or Bootstrap, you can spend an hour, do it with a buddy, or do it as a group of 3. It doesn't matter. It's not graded, but it's sort of like the 20% you need to know that will get you 80% of the way there. It's this Mozilla Foundation one, but it's on the syllabus and on the course homepage. You'll find a hyperlink to the actual tutorial. And as far as Bootstrap, I think, like I said, the main valuable features are, first of all, that it lets you think about higher level components. So a card or a nav bar instead of just a paragraph. It has a very nice grid layout. So if you want to sort of do it yourself, you can lay things out on a 12 by 12 grid and things will line up nicely. Doing that in raw CSS is quite challenging. And until Bootstrap became popular, you sort of had to do that manually. And most of us really kind of failed at it. And it's responsive in that you get reasonable behaviors even on widely different screen sizes, right? As long as you follow some of the basic rules. So If you use Bootstrap, this is kind of like if you follow Strunk and White's Elements of Style in writing. Anybody? The Elements of Style? Yes, 2 people have heard of it. Please preach it to the world. The Elements of Style is a book about writing and contains a bunch of rules that you shouldn't break. If you follow the guidelines in that book, you will not be Shakespeare, but you probably will not produce a truly awful piece of writing. If you follow the guidelines for using Bootstrap, you probably will not produce a truly awful looking website. In fact, you can produce something decent with a minimal amount of effort. OK. Let's see. All right, I'm not going to have time to do Hello World on Sinatra the way I want to do it because I don't want to rush through it. But any further questions on anything else that we've talked about today? I realize this is going really fast, but you're getting all of the ingredients, and there are so many ingredients to building web apps today. Very, very soon, like as soon as next week, you shall be using frameworks to do it.